Welcome back. Videos of violent crimes are constantly doing the rounds on social media. A month ago, 2 security guards were ambushed in Soweto, and police are hunting for 2 suspects seen hijacking and killing a man in cold blood in Welkom in the Free State. That happened just on Saturday. But are these shared videos desensitizing the public and creating paranoia? Let's discuss these psychological effects of crime on South Africans. We're joined now in studio here by Anna Moyo-Kupeto. She is from the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. And Lizette Lancaster joins us via our Skype line. She is from the Institute for Security Studies. Ladies, thanks very much for coming in and for your time, both of you. Anna, perhaps let's start off with you. Anytime you log on to Twitter, you search perhaps a hashtag that's doing the rounds relating to a criminal offense that has taken place, some video that was caught perhaps on CCTV. I mean, the stuff we see, it's shocking. What's your response to just the level of violence that is so freely available on social media?
Thank you, Michelle. It is really shocking. It is everywhere. Children see it on social media. They see it on television during news. They hear about it on the radio. They hear about relatives or friends or people they know in communities who've been victims of crime. They've seen it in their own communities where mob justice or vigilantism is being carried out by community members, for instance. So there is violence everywhere. And this, on the extreme, leads to the normalization of violence in our society, where it is no longer shocking to see a dead body or someone who's been violently killed or someone who's been violently beaten up, who's got serious injuries, for instance. It is just another statistic in our minds. And this normalization has got serious repercussions, long-term implications for our children, who then no longer see violence as what it is, as violence, something that should not be condoned, but it becomes a way of life, a normalized behavior that even they engage in schools, they engage in when they're playing together and in other social spheres, for instance. This is really problematic.
I mean, Lizette, what a sad indictment of our society that this level of violence can ever become normalized.
Exactly. And we know that we've got a violent past from colonialism through apartheid. And it's shaped who we are, all of us. But unfortunately, 25 years down the line, we haven't really been able to reduce those levels. We made significant headway. But in the past 6 years especially, we've seen an increase in all the violent or the recorded violent crime levels that we can count quite accurately, such as murder. And that shows that we are just not dealing with violence in a way we can, that's sustainable and effective. And unfortunately for us, what happens is that we deal with all our stresses and conflict in a violent way very often, because that becomes our default way of dealing with these type of problems.
Lizette, you've written about it extensively, this relationship between crime statistics that we all look to every year to sort of gauge how society is perhaps improving, how police are improving in terms of the service that they render to society. Is that a valuable way of sort of doing checks and balances of where we're at?
Yes, the trends that we pick up through the statistics provided by the police, as well as then the supplementary statistics that we get from Statistics South Africa through their Victims of Crime survey, together paint a picture of what trends we are experiencing as a nation. And although we see from the police statistics some decreases overall in the number of murders, not the number of murders, but the number of crimes that are reported to them over the past decade and so forth. Unfortunately, we are seeing increases in the past 6 years in the crime categories that we fear the most. And furthermore, although there seem to be slight decreases in certain crime categories reported or recorded by the police, we are seeing that people are reporting less crime to the police than they used to, even 2 years ago.
I mean, Anna, this is an important point, isn't it? The fact that the number of crimes may, in some instances, be declining, but the levels of fear in South Africans on the rise. What do you make of that?
Indeed, Michelle, and that is exactly what we're experiencing. We may be recording a decrease, but people are not feeling safe in their private spaces, for instance, where they're supposed to be feeling safe. That is like in their houses, for instance, in their homes, in their cars, where crime is increasingly also taking place. And again, this leads to some form of people are being hyper-vigilant, and this in itself is problematic because it comes with its own stresses. People are stressed out, they're frustrated, they don't know what else to do. Even in spaces where they're supposedly safe, they are not safe. When people are hyper-vigilant, for instance, then again, that frustration simmers below the surface, that fear simmers below the surface. So when someone is fearful, is afraid, they are more likely to respond in a more dangerous way than when they're calm, they're collected, they're thinking rationally, for instance. And again, another problem with this fear, the fact that people are afraid, they are hyper-vigilant, is that they no longer trust the criminal justice system. And when people lose that trust in the criminal justice system, then the tendency for the community members to take the law into their own hands also increases in communities where people feel that we cannot trust the police to protect us, therefore we need to protect ourselves. The dangers of people taking the law into their hands, again, first and foremost, is that law-abiding citizens become criminals, and then they can then be arrested for having committed a crime, having beaten someone to death, for instance. And secondly, it may look like a short-term measure of dealing with crime in communities, but the long-term effects of normalization of crime that I spoke about earlier, or normalization of violence that I spoke about earlier, then also increases in communities. Our children then see violence as a way of life, as normal behavior on how to deal with situations that are not comfortable for us, or situations that are threatening to them. For instance, we see it spilling out in schools where bullying, violence, children stepping each other in schools, and so forth. This is all because of the normalization of crime. They have seen it as a way of communicating, or as a way of finding solutions to whatever is uncomfortable or whatever is contentious amongst their relationships with people. And of course, relationships also break down because of again, the use of violence, the mistrust, and again, the fear that now is pervasive in our communities, and also in society.
What you're talking about now reminds me of that horrific case of the father who was parked outside his son's school as his son attended extra lessons ahead of exams. His son apparently knocked on the car window. The father was sleeping at the time. He responded by opening fire and killing his own son. I mean, that's the kind of sort of hyper-vigilism we're talking about, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed.
And the response is just...
It's spontaneous.
It's spontaneous.
You are responding in fear. You don't want to be a victim, therefore you need to attack first before calming down to find out what the problem or the non-problem is.
Yeah. Just some closing comments from you, Lizette, just in terms of, you know, the psyche of South Africans. We are, as Anna says, we are on such high alert everywhere we go, where we spend time with our families, whether it's outdoors, whether it's at home, whether it's waiting in the car for your son to finish his extra lessons.
Exactly. We see from the National Victims of Crime survey that 11% of people that can afford it actually, you know, use private security to help them feel safer. But many communities cannot afford these type of measures. And many communities live in extremely high-risk areas. We know, for instance, that 13% of areas, police station precincts, actually make up more than 50% of all the murders in this country. So we have to ask ourselves, what can be done? And the question or the answers lie not only with the criminal justice system and better policing and better courts, and actually prosecuting perpetrators, but also in figuring out how we can do violence prevention through especially helping our really stressed parents and communities out there to try and just navigate life in a non-violent way.
Absolutely. Anna, before we go, some closing comments from you just on the way forward here.
Indeed, as a way forward, we really need to consider a multi-pronged approach in dealing with these issues, but again, also dealing with some of the psychological effects of violence and crime, the increase in the crime statistics as we have seen over the years. We may have the numbers, but again, the numbers are not a true reflection of what is going on. The numbers may be decreasing, but the hypervigilance of victims and would-be victims is quite telling in the agency of actually dealing with this, using a multi-pronged approach in dealing with the socio-economic issues that underlie these high levels of crime in our communities. Again, dealing again with reforming our criminal justice system and ensuring that we again regain that the police and the rest of the criminal justice system instills the trust and the confidence that communities should have in the criminal justice system. Again, there is a need to deal with the social aspects of the high levels of crime. What is it in our society, in our psyche as a society, that is leading to crime, that is not reducing the fears that we have when it comes to crime? What is it that has taken away our innocence and has eaten away the moral fabric of our society? Once we deal with the root causes of some of the causes of high levels of crimes, then we can begin to slowly begin to increase the confidence that people should have in the criminal justice system on the one hand, and again have citizens believe again in the goodness of people as we should.
And in the humanity of people. Thanks very much. Such an important discussion taking place here. Anna Moyo-Kopeta from the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation in studio. Thanks very much for your time. And joining us via our Skype line, Lizette Lancaster from the Institute for Security Studies. Thanks, ladies, both of you, for your time, this incredibly important discussion.